October 1878. The cold came early to Ruby Valley that year. Frost crept white across the peaks of the Bitterroot, not the seasonal kind that comes and goes, but the permanent kind, the kind that says, "This is how it is now, and it will be this way until I decide otherwise." Below, a creek ran slower, thicker, like a man choosing his words carefully before the silence takes him. In a cabin set alone on the open grassland, lamplight trembled behind a frost-rimmed window. A woman stood at her stove, back straight, face giving nothing away. 4 months now since she'd let herself cry. A year now since she'd slept a full night through. On the table behind her, a ledger lay open, more red ink than black. Then she heard it. Not a halloo from the gate. Not the familiar sound of hooves on the trail. A knock at the door. In the dark, her hand found the rifle before her mind had finished asking, who would come? This late, this quiet, this far from anywhere. The cold came early to Ruby Valley that year. Not the polite kind of cold. Not the kind that gives you warning. The kind that arrives overnight like an uninvited relative and simply refuses to leave. By the second week of October 1878, the peaks above the valley had gone white. Not the seasonal white that came and went. The permanent kind. The kind that said, "This is how it is now, and it will be this way until I decide otherwise." The creek behind the Aldridge barn had started speaking differently. Slower. Thicker. Like a man choosing his words carefully before the silence takes him. Dorothea Aldridge stood at her kitchen window and watched the frost eat the last of her garden. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in 4 months. She'd decided somewhere around June that crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Like hired help. Like sleeping past 5. Like any of the 100 small comforts that had quietly packed their bags and left when James did. A year since they'd found him at the base of the North Ridge, face down. The horse, standing 20 feet away, reins trailing, looking confused about what it was supposed to do next. Which was fair. Dot had felt the same way ever since. She turned from the window. The kitchen table had 2 chairs. James had built them himself. The second winter they were here, made them slightly uneven because he'd been learning as he went. She'd teased him about it for years. "Wobbly chairs," she'd said. "What kind of carpenter makes wobbly chairs?" He'd said, "The kind who's better with cattle." She hadn't sat in his chair since March. She sat in it now, deliberately. The way you do something that hurts because you've decided hurting is better than avoiding. Because avoiding is just a longer road to the same place, and you might as well take the direct route and get it done. The ledger was open in front of her. Red numbers, more red than black. The winter feed supply was short by at least 1/3. The north fence, the same fence James had been checking when he fell, needed replacing before the first heavy snow, and she'd been patching it alone for 2 months because there was no one else to do it. The roof on the east side of the barn had developed a slow leak. The cattle in the north pasture needed moving before the ground froze hard enough to make it difficult. The water trough near the horse barn needed a repair she'd been managing around for 3 weeks. 280 head of cattle, 14 horses, 400 acres of the best grassland in Ruby Valley, and one woman who hadn't slept a full night since March. She closed the ledger, stood up, put on her coat, went back to work. This was, she had learned, the only available response to most things, not because it solved them, because it kept you moving. And moving was the difference between the life you still had and the one you'd already lost. The afternoon passed the way afternoons passed now, in tasks completed against a backdrop of silence that she had largely stopped noticing. She moved the north pasture cattle. She repaired the worst section of fence with materials she'd had to ration carefully because she couldn't afford to waste a nail. She checked the east barn roof and decided it could wait another week. She fed the horses and checked the water trough and found the leak was slightly worse than last time, which meant it couldn't wait as long as she'd hoped. By the time the sun dropped behind the Bitterroot peaks, She'd accomplished everything essential and nothing she wanted to, which was, in her experience, the standard measure of a working day. She came inside, made coffee, stood at the window and watched the dark come down over the valley with the particular quality it had in October. Fast, purposeful, like it had somewhere to be. She just turned from the window to check the stew on the stove when she heard it. A knock, not at the gate. Not a halloo from down the trail the way most people announce themselves. A knock. At her door. In the dark. Her hand found the Winchester before her brain had finished processing the sound. She'd been reaching for that rifle in the dark for a year now. Some habits formed fast out here. Some habits, once formed, didn't let go. "Who's there?" Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. A pause. Then a voice, low, rough, like gravel under a boot heel. "Name's Harwick, Boone Harwick. Heard in town you might be needing a hand." She didn't lower the rifle. "Who told you that?" "Reverend at the Methodist Church. Said the Aldridge widow was running herself into the ground, trying to keep the place going alone." A pause. "Said you were too proud to ask but might not say no if the right offer came along." That was absolutely Reverend Cooley. Interfering. Well-meaning. Approximately 70% right about everything, which was enough to be both useful and infuriating in roughly equal measure. "And you just happened to be looking for work," Dot said. "Not exactly." The voice shifted slightly. Not evasive. More like a man reaching for the honest version of something complicated. "We've been coming down from the high country. Been up in the Bitterroot Range the past few years. My daughter needs..." He stopped. "Started differently. She needs more than I can give her up there." Dot opened the door 2 inches. Kept the rifle visible. The man on her porch was large. That was the first thing. Not tall exactly, or rather, tall but wide with it, the kind of big that comes from years of physical work, rather than size for its own sake. He wore a buckskin coat that had seen serious weather. Not worn out, worn in. There was a difference. Dark beard, thick and shot through with early gray, the gray of a man not yet 40, who'd had a harder decade than most. Eyes that caught the lamplight from inside, a particular shade of brown, warm-toned but watchful. The eyes of a man who made a habit of noticing things, and had learned not to let people see him doing it. He held his hat in both hands. Behind him, half in the shadow of the porch post, a child small, 8, maybe 9. Dark hair in 2 braids that were not quite even, which told Dot immediately that the girl had done them herself. She wore a coat 2 sizes too big that had probably belonged to her father once and been badly altered to fit a child. She held a cloth doll pressed to her chest with both arms. The grip of someone who'd learned not to put things down in case they disappeared. The girl wasn't looking at Dot. She was looking at the door frame. Specifically at the place where the wood had been patched, with a different timber and older repair, done before the Aldridges arrived. She was studying it, the way you study something interesting. Not frightened, not hoping for anything, just noticing. "What can you do?" Dot said. "Cattle, horses, fences, structures. Anything mechanical that needs fixing. I can read weather, track, hunt and preserve for winter." He met her gaze without flinching. "I don't drink. I don't gamble. I keep my word. Can you mend fences in the dark, with frozen ground and inadequate tools, because there's no other time to do it?" A pause. He almost smiled. "Almost, yes, ma'am. I can do that too." Dot looked at the child one more time. The girl had stopped studying the door frame. She was looking at Dot now. Direct, calm. The assessment of someone who'd spent years reading situations that mattered and had learned to do it quickly. 8 years old. "With eyes like that, Papa," the girl said quietly. Not scared. Just informational. "I'm cold," and that was that. She gave them the storage room off the back of the kitchen. She'd cleaned it that morning. Not because she'd expected anyone. Just because cleaning was something to do when the silence of the house got too loud, and she needed her hands to be useful, so her mind wouldn't wander somewhere dark. The room had a small window that faced east, which meant it caught the first morning light. A wood floor she'd swept twice. An old feather mattress leaned against the wall that she pulled down and laid flat without ceremony. 2 wool blankets from the chest in the hall. A hook on the door for coats. Harwick watched her do this without offering to help and without getting in the way, which was exactly the right call and told her something about him. A man who helped when help was needed and stayed out of the way when it wasn't. She'd known few enough of those. 30 a month, she said, plus board, 2-week trial. After that, if you're worth what you say, we renegotiate. Fair. I work from sunup. I expect the same from anyone on my payroll. Understood. The girl. Dot looked at her. The child was standing in the doorway of the storage room, examining it with the same systematic attention she'd given the door frame. She stays close to the house. She follows what I say when I say it. She doesn't go near the North Ridge alone. The man's jaw tightened slightly. Just slightly. She won't? What's her name? Wren. Dot looked at the girl. Wren. That's an unusual name. The girl looked up from her examination of the room. Her eyes were brown, the same particular shade as her father's, warm-toned but watchful, the same habit of noticing. But in the child it sat differently, less guarded. More hungry mama named me, she said. Flat. Not sad, or rather, sad in the way of someone who'd processed the sadness down to a hard, smooth stone she carried in her pocket. Something solid and familiar rather than sharp, she said. Wrens are small, but they're loud when they need to be. Dot held the girl's gaze for a moment. Your mother was right, she said, without making it a thing. Wren looked at her, just for a second. Something in the girl's expression, not warmth exactly, not yet. More like the first small notch in a door that had been sealed shut. The beginning of a question. Sunup, Dot said to the man, and went back to bank the fire. She lay awake for a long time. Not a new problem. She'd been lying awake since March, since the night a rider came to the door, with news she'd known was coming from the look on his face before he opened his mouth. But tonight was different. The house had sounds in it again. Small sounds she hadn't heard in a year. Boots set down carefully so as not to wake anyone. The low murmur of a man's voice, barely audible through the wall. Talking to his daughter in the dark, she couldn't make out words, just the rhythm. The cadence of someone keeping watch over something they loved. It was a sound she recognized in her bones, the sound of a person being present for another person. And she had not heard it in 12 months. And the recognition of it was, James would have liked this, she thought. Having people in the house. She stopped thinking about James, because that was the fastest road to a place she couldn't afford to go on a work night. There were fences to check at sunup and 3 weeks of deferred maintenance that wouldn't defer much longer, and a winter coming that didn't care about her feelings. She was up at 4:30, before the alarm. Before the birds, the kitchen was cold. She built the fire up and put the coffee on, and stood at the window, watching the sky go from black to the deep blue that sits just before dawn, the color that looks like the world holding its breath before it decides whether to continue. She heard boots on the back steps. Harwick came in without knocking. The door had been unlocked, he'd clearly noticed, and he'd correctly interpreted that as an invitation to treat the kitchen as a working space. He was already in his coat. Already awake in the complete way, not the stumbling toward coffee way, but the fully present way, alert and quiet, and taking in the kitchen with those watching eyes. He stopped when he saw her at the stove. She held up the coffee pot. He nodded. She poured 2 cups. They stood at the counter, drank and silent, looked out at the darkness together. And it was strange. How not strange it was. 2 people who didn't know each other, standing in a kitchen before dawn, and nothing awkward about it at all. She thought about that for a moment and decided it said something about him. About people who were used to being quietly purposeful in the dark. North fence, she said eventually. 3 posts need replacing before the next storm. The corner section is the worst. I saw it when we rode in, he said. The lean on the third post from the gate is close to failing. I'd start there. She looked at him sidelong. You assessed my fence line in the dark. Habit, he said. She thought about asking what kind of habit. Decided it could wait. Tools are in the barn. You'll find what you need. He drank his coffee. Set the mug down. Picked up his hat. The girl, Dot, said before he reached the door. He turned. She can help me with the morning chores, if she wants. I won't push her. Dot looked at her own hands around her mug. But if she'd like something to do while you're working. She'd like that, Harwick said, quietly. She just won't say so, he went out. Dot stood in the kitchen with her coffee and the early dark and the fire building behind her, and tried to remember the last time she'd had a conversation, before sunrise, that didn't feel like talking to herself. Wren appeared at 6, fully dressed, boots on, braids not quite even, which Dot now understood was simply how they always looked, the work of small hands doing their best without a mirror or help. She carried Rosie, the cloth doll, tucked under one arm like a document she wasn't leaving behind. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Dot with those level brown eyes, and said nothing. Dot said nothing. She just picked up the second basket by the door and held it out. Wren took it. They went to the hen house together. Dot showed her where the nesting boxes were. Which hens were temperamental. The gray one in the far corner would peck if you rushed, and the black and white one near the door had to be approached from the left. How to move your hands slowly so they didn't startle. How to feel for a warm egg without disturbing the nest. Wren watched once. Then she did it herself. She collected 9 eggs without dropping one, without startling a single bird. Moving through the hen house with a stillness that was remarkable in a child her age. The stillness of someone who'd learned that sudden movements caused problems. That patience was a practical skill and not a virtue. You've done this before, Dot said. No, Wren set the last egg in the basket with care. But Papa taught me how to be around animals that don't know you yet. She looked at the nearest hen with something that might have been professional respect. You have to let them decide first. You have to let them decide first. Smart, Dot said. Wren shrugged. But she stood a little straighter. They went on to the other morning chores without much ceremony. Dot didn't explain everything, just showed what she was doing, and let the girl watch and join when she was ready. The water troughs. The morning feed scattered in the right areas to keep the chickens from clustering. The 3 cows in the near pasture that had been off their forage for a week, which required checking systematically for signs that it was more than the cold. By the time they'd finished, Wren had stopped carrying Rosie under her arm and started carrying her in her hand, swinging slightly as she walked. Small thing, the loosening of a grip that had been too tight. But Dot noticed at breakfast, eggs, biscuits, the last of the salt pork that needed to be used before it turned. Wren ate with focused attention, the way children eat when they've been going short. Not fast, just thorough. Dot watched her pocket half a biscuit without drawing attention to it and said nothing. Just put 2 more biscuits on the plate. Wren looked at the biscuits. Then at Dot. There's plenty, Dot said. Matter of fact, eat until you're not hungry. The girl ate both biscuits. Harwick came in from the fence line at 7, hands rough with cold, sat down at the table and ate without ceremony. He looked at his daughter's face. Something in it that hadn't been there the day before, some small fraction of softness. And then he looked at Dot with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Something that moved through it quickly and was gone before she could name it. She didn't try to. Some things needed time before they had names. 3rd post is done, he said. The corner section will take another half day. I found 2 more weak spots on the east line. I can mark them today and repair tomorrow, she said. After breakfast. After breakfast, she agreed. Wren looked between them. Her eyes were doing that thing, cataloging, arranging, fitting information into some internal system. Dot was beginning to suspect was considerably more sophisticated than it appeared. The days found their rhythm fast, faster than Dot had expected. Faster than she'd thought possible with strangers in the house. Harwick worked the way she worked, without ceremony, without needing to be managed, with the quiet focus of someone who understood that on a ranch, productivity was care. Every repaired fence was a form of attention. Every piece of equipment he restored to working order was its own kind of statement. This place matters, and I am treating it accordingly. He spoke rarely. When he did, it was worth listening to. On the fourth day, he found the sick cattle before she did. 3 animals at the far end of the west pasture, showing early signs of a respiratory problem she'd been watching for since the temperature dropped. He'd been in the far pasture before dawn, moving through the herd systematically, reading each animal the way she'd seen him read terrain. Not performing competence. Just working. You know cattle medicine, she said. Looking at his notes, actual written notes, in a hand more educated than she'd expected. Enough, he said. Been relying on myself for most things the past few years. She noticed things. The way he positioned himself in rooms, always with sight lines to the door. The way he cataloged people and situations with the same quiet efficiency Wren used. The way he'd clocked Reverend Cooley's approach from 200 yards that morning when she hadn't noticed the Reverend at all. The way certain questions made something in his expression go very still and carefully blank. Not evasive, exactly. More like a man who'd learned to put distances between himself and things before deciding whether they were safe, she thought, about all of this. And didn't ask, because she had her own things she wasn't ready to discuss, and that seemed fair. Wren, meanwhile, was something else entirely. Dot had expected a child who needed managing. A child who'd require reassurance and entertainment. And the particular kind of patience you had to consciously deploy. She got none of that. What she got was a small person who moved through the ranch like she was mapping it, who asked precise questions and remembered every answer, who spent an hour one afternoon sitting completely still at the edge of the upper pasture, watching the cattle move, and then produced from her coat pocket a folded piece of paper on which she'd drawn a rough but accurate diagram of which animals drifted together, which ones stayed separate, and which 2 were clearly the herd's decision-makers. "What's this?" Dot said. "The brown one with the notch in her ear leads," Wren said. "But she watches the spotted one first. Before she decides anything." She pointed at her diagram. "The spotted one is the one they actually trust. The brown one is the one they follow." Dot looked at the diagram, then at the cattle, then back at the diagram. "How long did you watch them?" "Since this morning," Wren said. Like it was obvious, Dot folded the diagram carefully and put it in her apron pocket. "In the mountains," she said carefully. "What did you and your father do?" "To pass the time." The question surprised Wren, not because it was intrusive, but because most adults didn't ask her things like that. They asked, "Are you all right? Are you warm enough? Do you need anything?" Not, "What did you do?" "Tracked animals mostly," Wren said. "Papa taught me how to read signs. Which way something went, how long ago, how big. Whether it was scared or calm." She paused. "We made maps, drew things we saw. Papa taught me my letters and numbers." Another pause, longer. "He told me stories about when he worked for the government. I don't think he meant to tell me as much as he did, but I asked a lot of questions and he has trouble lying to me." "What kind of work did he do?" Dot said, carefully. "For the government." Wren looked at her steadily. "The kind where he had to find people who didn't want to be found." She pulled Rosie slightly tighter. "He was very good at it." And then she went back to watching the cattle. And Dot stood there in the October light with this information, turning it in her hands like a piece of found wood, feeling its grain, testing its weight, beginning to understand what it might be for. She found the journal on a Thursday. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been looking for the insurance documents from the Bozeman land office. which James had kept in the back of the desk drawer, behind everything else, because that was where James kept anything he didn't want to deal with immediately. She'd had to move several stacks of paper to find them. And there it was, the last journal James had kept journals since before they married. Not daily. He wasn't that kind of man. More like when something needed thinking through on paper, when his head got too full. She'd always known about them, had never read them without being invited to. That had been one of their agreements. You could have things that were only yours, even inside a marriage, especially inside a marriage. She'd told herself she'd read it when she was ready, a year, and she still hadn't been ready. She sat down in his chair. She was doing that more often now. She'd noticed, and she'd decided to let herself, and open to the last entry, James's handwriting, the particular slant of it. The way he wrote his capital H like small buildings, with careful clean lines. October 3rd, 1877. 3 weeks before his death, she read slowly. Most of it she knew. The water rights dispute, Pruitt had been escalating. The cut fences, the 2 calves that had died of causes that didn't quite add up. James's careful legal mind laying out the situation, building his case, trying to figure out what recourse they had. And then, near the bottom of the page, toward the end, spoke to Aldous in Butte. He has a contact at the Federal Land Office. Says there was a deputy working these territories 3 or 4 years ago, man named Harwick, who'd built a serious case against a land fraud ring operating across 3 territories. The case was buried. Pressure from above. The deputy apparently resigned or was forced out. Aldous doesn't know where he went. But if he's still out there, if he could be found, the information he gathered wouldn't just save our land. It would bring down the whole operation. His name is Boone Harwick. She read it twice. Then she set the journal on the table and sat very still for a while. Outside, she could hear Harwick at the fence line. The steady rhythm of a hammer. Regular, unhurried. The sound of work being done right. His name is Boone Harwick, the man who was fixing her north fence right now, whose daughter had spent the morning mapping her cattle, who'd knocked on her door 11 days ago as if he'd found the place by accident. Dot pressed both hands flat on the table. Breathe. She breathed. James had been looking for this man. This man had shown up at her door, and he had no idea who James Aldridge was. She needed to think. She'd learned, the hard way, through a series of decisions made in emotional haste in the first terrible months after James, that thinking before speaking was not a luxury. It was a discipline. Like any other discipline on a working ranch, it had to be maintained even when, especially when, you didn't feel like it. So she put the journal away. She finished her coffee, she went back to work, and she spent the rest of the day watching the man fix her fences and wondering what providence or accident, or the sheer stubbornness of the universe, had seen fit to deliver him to her door. She didn't tell him that night. She lay awake, thinking through what it meant. James had been trying to find Harwick, looking for help, believing that this one man held the thread that could unravel what Pruitt had been building across the territory for years. And then James had died. And a year later, Harwick had appeared. Not because he was looking for her. He'd come down from his mountain. Because his daughter needed more than wilderness, because she was 8 years old and had never sat at a table with other people. Because some point of no return had finally arrived, and a father had looked at his child and understood that keeping her safe was not the same as letting her live. Coincidence. Or something that looked like coincidence from the outside and felt, from the inside, like something James would have called providence, and she'd always called the stubbornness of the universe. Either way, the man was here, and she was going to have to figure out what to do about it. She told him on the 11th day she'd been watching him first, building evidence the way you built any case worth making. Carefully, with patience, not from feeling but from observation. What she saw was this. He was methodical. He didn't cut corners. When he found a problem, he addressed the root of it, rather than managing the symptom, which was rarer than you'd think in a hired hand. The water trough that had been leaking for 3 weeks. He'd found the split timber at the source and replaced it, not patched it. The hinges on the corral gate that had been sticking. He'd pulled them, cleaned them, reset them with better placement. These were not the actions of a man going through motions. He was honest in the particular way of people who've been dishonest and paid for it, not preachy about it, just precise. When he didn't know something, he said so. When he'd made an error in the fence calculation, he named it before she had to. He was extraordinarily careful about Wren, not anxious. Attentive in the way you're attentive to something you understand is irreplaceable. He tracked where she was without appearing to. He knew when her mood shifted before she showed it. He adjusted what he said and how he said it in response to things Dot could barely perceive. He was a good father. That mattered. More than she'd expected it to matter. On the 11th day, she waited until Wren was asleep. She'd taken to going out later herself, making a last check on the animals, and she'd noticed Harwick did the same, that they often ended up at the porch together in the dark, in a silence that had started to feel less like the absence of conversation, and more like a specific type of company. She went inside, came back with the journal, set it on the porch railing between them. He looked at it, then at her. "My husband," she said. "Last entry, October 3rd. Of last year." He picked it up. She watched his face in the lamplight from the window as he read. He read it twice, the same way she had. When he set it down, he was still for a moment in the particular way she'd learned. Meant him processing something significant, not just understanding it, but rearranging the furniture of his thinking around it. "He knew my name," Harwick said. "He was trying to find you. For how long?" "I don't know. At least since that entry. Maybe longer." She looked at her hands on the railing. "He died October 25th of last year. 3 weeks after he wrote that, the night was very quiet." "The accident," Harwick said. She heard in the word the same tone she'd heard when she thought it. The quotation marks around it, that appeared whenever her careful rational mind stopped managing the darker theory. "They called it an accident," she said. "He was checking the north fence, the same fence you've been repairing. The ridge above it, the rock is loose up there. He must have gone up to check where the cattle were drifting and..." She stopped, "and fell, but he'd checked that ridge 100 times. He knew every loose stone on it." She looked out at the dark. "He was careful. He was always so careful about the ridge." A pause. "And 3 days after the funeral, Pruitt's man showed up with an offer on the property." Harwick was quiet. "Before I'd finished grieving," she said. "Before the ground had settled, the fire in the house made the window glow orange. A coyote called, far off, and went unanswered." "What do you know about Pruitt?" Harwick said finally. "He owns the biggest operation in the valley. Bought up 4 smaller ranches in the past 2 years. 2 of them from families who'd been here longer than anyone. The others, there were circumstances. The kind that are hard to prove. He wants the water, the Ruby Creek. Year-round water is the difference between a working ranch and a dying one out here. Control the creek, control the valley." She looked at him. "But you knew that already." He looked back at her. "The case you were building," she said, "when you were still with the Federal Service. What was it?" A pause. The particular kind of pause that precedes honesty. "Land fraud across 3 territories. Same method, different valleys. Find the best water source. Buy or pressure out the landowners around it, one by one, before they understand what's happening. Document everything in a way that looks legal. By the time anyone realizes the pattern the consolidation is complete, and the legal challenge is nearly impossible." He said it flat, like reading from a report he'd memorized long ago. "I spent 3 years building that case. I had witnesses, documents. A thread that went from the local operations all the way back to the financial interests behind them. What happened to it? It was buried, he said. Pressure from the territorial government. Someone with reach and motivation. I was reassigned. Then he stopped. There were other things that happened, and then I left. Dot waited. My wife died, he said. Because of the case. Because of someone connected to the case who came for me and found her instead. He said it the way you say the thing that is the core of everything. Flat true. Terrible in its simplicity. I killed the man responsible and handed in my badge the same day. And went to the mountains. Dot looked at the journal on the railing between them. James was trying to find you, she said, because he thought you were the only person with enough evidence and enough knowledge of the pattern to stop what Pruitt is doing here. She touched the cover of the journal. He didn't get the chance. I don't know how much I still have, he said. After 4 years. What's still usable, but you know things, she said. You know the pattern. You know the names above Pruitt. You know how to build a case. She stood up from the railing, picked up the journal, looked at him steadily. James died trying to protect this land. If Pruitt was involved in that, and I believe he was, then the best thing I can do for James is what he was trying to do. A pause. I'd like your help, if you're willing. But I'd understand if you said no. He looked at her for a long moment, in the lamplight. With a long moment in the lamplight, the mountains behind him and the cold coming down off Kaichanaway. And his daughter asleep inside the house he'd been fixing piece by piece since he arrived. He looked like something carved out of the land itself. Not polished, not performed. Just present. Completely, weightily present, the way very few people were. I'll think about it, he said. Which, she was already learning, was not his way of saying no. 3 days later, morning, she was at the stove. He came in from checking the cattle, earlier than usual, with the specific way he moved when something had settled inside him. A decision made, a direction set. He sat down at the table. James's contact in Butte, he said. Aldous. Do you have a way to reach him? Dot turned from the stove. Yes, I want to send a letter. Through him only. No one in town. He looked at her steadily. I have a former colleague in the federal service. Man named Augustine Pryor. Honest man. Doesn't owe anyone around here anything. If he's still in the service, he'd be someone worth contacting about reopening the case. Dot set down the spoon in her hand. You're going to help, she said. I'm going to help, he said. No ceremony, no speech. Just fact. She nodded. He nodded. That was that. Wren appeared in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, hair loose, rubbing her eye with one hand and holding Rosie with the other. She looked at her father, looked at Dot, performed her rapid internal calculation with those watchful eyes. Something changed, she said. We're going to do something about the problem, Harwick said. Wren considered this. The man who keeps coming to threaten people. Yes, she nodded once. Firm. Good. She went to the stove and looked up at Dot. Can I help with the eggs this morning? Yes, Dot said. Get your boots. Wren went to get her boots. And Dot stood at the stove and let herself feel, just for a moment, what it was like to have people beside her. Not behind her, not in front of her. Beside. The particular quality of not being alone. James would have liked this, she thought. James would have liked all of this. She let herself think it this time without making herself stop. What happened the following week was less dramatic than it would become later. More like weather building than weather breaking. Odom came on a Tuesday. 3 men, deliberate pace. The particular performance of casual that was anything but. Dot saw them from the kitchen window and was on the porch before they reached the gate. She was aware, without looking, that Harwick had come around the corner of the barn and positioned himself 8 feet to her left hand, with the easy stance of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. She was also aware, though she couldn't see her, that somewhere above, probably on the low roof of the porch overhang where a small girl could lie flat and be invisible, was Wren. Mrs. Aldridge. Odom touched his hat. He was a lean man, 40-something, with a quality of coiled stillness that reminded Dot of a rope under tension. Friendly face. Wrong eyes. Writing out on behalf of Mr. Pruitt. Just a neighborly check-in. I'm not alone. Dot said. Odom's eyes moved to Harwick, paused there. A professional assessment, quick and thorough, the kind that happened between men with certain kinds of histories. New hire, he said. Ranch hand, Dot said. Odom looked at Harwick for 2 seconds longer than casual interest required. Then back at Dot. Mr. Pruitt's been thinking about you. Coming into winter, a property this size. The property is fine. There have been some issues with water distribution. In the valley, Odom continued, like she hadn't spoken. Mr. Pruitt is prepared to be generous with anyone who wants to discuss a transition before things get difficult. The word difficult landed with all the freight he'd intended it to carry. Dot looked at him steadily. Tell Mr. Pruitt the Aldridge property isn't for sale. Not now, not in the spring, not after a difficult winter. Not ever, Odom smiled, the smile of a man who'd heard this answer before. I'll pass that along. His eyes went to Harwick one more time. You've been in the valley long, friend. Not long, Harwick said, planning to stay. Planning to work, Harwick said. That's as far ahead as I look. They rode off. Dot waited until they were well down the road. He knew you, she said. He recognized something, Harwick said. Not me, specifically, but the type. We've never met. But he's worked for men I've dealt with before. That night, Wren appeared at the table with her second notebook, smaller, that Dot hadn't seen before. She set it open between her father and Dot without speaking. It was a record. Everything that had happened in the yard that afternoon. Names of the 3 men, with descriptions so specific they could have been police reports. Exact times of arrival and departure, word-for-word notes on what Odom had said. And at the bottom, 3 observations. The tall one in the gray coat checked the barn door 3 times. Not the house, the barn. Like he was counting something. Odom's horse was tired, lathered under the saddlecloth. They came fast and then slowed down when they got close. They didn't want us to see them coming. The one on the right never looked at Mrs. Dot once. He looked at the road behind them the whole time. Someone is watching us, and they know it. Harwick read it. Read it again. Set it down. Looked at his daughter. Where were you? He said. Roof, Wren said. The low part over the porch. I stayed flat. Nobody looked up. You could have been seen. I wasn't. But you could have been. Wren met his eyes. You taught me to be still, she said. I was still. A pause. Papa, I know things were different in the mountains. But this is where we are now. And you taught me to be useful. She looked at the notebook. This is how I'm useful. The kitchen was quiet. She's right, Dot said quietly. About all 3. Harwick looked at her. Then back at Wren. You tell me before, he said finally. Before you do anything like that again. Agreed, agreed. Wren said. She took back the notebook, closed it carefully to put the kettle on, as if the matter was settled, because to her, it was. And in the warm kitchen, with the fire going and the mountains holding the cold outside, and a small girl clattering at the stove. With complete confidence, something settled between Dot and Harwick. Something that didn't have a name yet, but it was there, the way a winter is there before the first snow falls. You feel it in the air, you know it's coming. You'd be a fool to pretend otherwise. She was not a fool, neither was he. The north fence held through the first October storm. Harwick had built it to hold. That was the kind of man he was, the kind who built things to last, not because someone was watching, but because it was the right way to do a thing and he didn't know another way. Dot Aldridge understood that kind of person. She'd married one once. She looked at the fence in the morning, after the storm, standing straight and solid in the new snow, and she thought, James would have liked this man. Then she went inside to make breakfast for 3. Which was, for the first time in a year, not a thing that needed forcing. It was just what the morning was. November came in like a threat, not a loud one. The quiet kind. The kind that stands at the edge of your property and doesn't say anything, and doesn't have to. The first morning of the month, Dot walked out to find the upper water gate jammed. Not broken, not worn. Jammed deliberately, something metal wedged into the mechanism from above, where the Ruby Creek entered the Aldridge property from the shared channel. She stood there looking at it for a long time. Then she went back to the house. Harwick had already fixed it. Before she'd found it, apparently. Before he'd come to tell her. 2 nights ago, he said. While the snow was coming down, I heard something. Thought it was an animal. His jaw tightened. I was wrong. Can you fix it? Already did. Fixed it and documented it. Drew what I found. He put a folded paper on the kitchen table. His drawing was precise. Dimensions noted. The kind of documentation a man makes when he knows it will need to stand up to scrutiny later. She folded it back and added it to the tin box under the floorboard in the pantry. The box that was growing heavier every week. He's not going to stop, she said. No, Harwick said. He's just getting started. Wren heard everything. This was simply a fact of life now. Like the weather, like the state of the north fence. On a cold Thursday in the second week of November, Dot was in the barn working on a harness. Harwick was at the McCaffrey place. Wren was supposed to be doing her reading lesson at the kitchen table. Supposed to be. Dot heard a board creak overhead. Wren. Dot said, a pause. Yes, come down. Wren appeared at the loft ladder, climbed down with Rosie under one arm and her notebook under the other, and stood in front of Dot with an expression that was not quite guilty. More like a person who had made a calculated decision and is prepared to defend it. Odom came by this morning, Wren said. While you were in the south pasture. He stopped at the gate. He didn't come in. He just sat there for 20 minutes and looked at the property. She opened her notebook. The entry was thorough. Times, duration, direction. A note. He looked at the barn more than the house. He looked at the creek. He didn't look at where you were working, which means he either didn't know you were there or didn't care. And then a second note underlined, he counted. I don't know what he was counting. But his lips were moving. Dot read this twice. Good girl, she said. Wren looked up at her quickly. Like praise landed differently than she was used to. You should have told me right away, Dot said. When something like that happens, you find me. You don't sit alone in a hayloft with it. I didn't want to interrupt your work, Wren. Dot crouched down to her level. Met those brown eyes. Your safety is never an interruption. Understand? The girl held her gaze. Something moved in it, not melting exactly. More like a small, careful structural shift. Like when ice starts to change its mind about being ice. Yes, she said. Good. Now come inside. You still have 3 chapters of reading to finish before your father gets back. Wren fell into step beside her. And halfway to the house, without announcement or preamble, she took Dot's hand. Just like that. Like it was something she'd been considering for a while and had finally decided was acceptable. Dot didn't make anything of it. Didn't slow down, didn't squeeze too tight, just walked. But she felt it all the way to the kitchen. The cattle died on a Wednesday, 5 of them, in the night, down in the west pasture closest to the creek. Harwick found them at first light and came back to the house with his jaw set and his eyes doing the careful thing they did when he was controlling something that wanted to be less controlled. Water, he said, west trough. Something got into it upstream. She sat down because her legs made the decision before her brain approved it. 5 head, 5 animals she'd bought, fed, vaccinated, moved through 3 seasons. 5 animals that represented money she didn't have to spare, could be natural, she heard herself say. Because part of her still needed to say it. Harwick sat down across from her. Let her have the sentence. Didn't argue with it. After a moment, boot prints, multiple people. 2 nights ago, maybe 3, so. Not natural. He told her about the railroad survey then, the rumor James had mentioned, that the Northern Pacific was looking at routes through the valley. If the survey goes through Ruby Valley, the land value doubles, maybe triples. Water rights become more valuable than the land itself. He set his hands flat on the table. He's not patient out of goodness. He's patient because he's waiting for a specific event. And if that event is coming, he needs this valley consolidated before it arrives. 5 cattle, a poisoned trough, a jammed water gate, an honest man dead on a ridge he'd walked 100 times. What do we do? She said, same as before. Harwick said, we document. We build. We don't give him a reason to escalate further until we're ready. And if he escalates anyway, he looked at her. Then we're ready anyway, he said. The valley was paying attention. Not loudly, not all at once. The way communities absorb bad information. Slowly, in pieces, through the informal network of people who share water sources and fence lines. Dot heard things at the dry goods store, at the Methodist church, the Delaney place sold. Generous offer, everyone said. The Younts lost their breeding bulls to a disease that came on fast and strange, right before they'd had to accept Pruitt's offer. The Brennan brothers spent 8 months unable to move their cattle to summer pasture because of a disputed access road. Pieces. All pieces. Dot brought these pieces back to Harwick. He listened to each one, added it to his own set, drew connections on a sheet of paper he kept in the tin box, not a map of land, but a map of pattern. There's someone here, Dot said one night, studying the pattern, in town. In a position of trust. She felt the shape of it the way you feel a stone underwater. Before you see it, you feel the current change. Judge Clarence Harkness, appointed 3 years ago. Handled every land dispute in Ruby Valley since. Efficient, impartial, by all appearances honest. Who had handled the Brennan Road dispute. Who had signed off on the water rights modification Pruitt filed in September. Who had been at Pruitt's supper table in June. Judge Harkness. She said. Harwick looked at her with that quality of stillness. That's a serious accusation. I'm not accusing, she said. I'm thinking out loud. If Harkness was Pruitt's instrument, then every legal move they made locally went through him. Which meant their record had to be strong enough to go over his head. Federal jurisdiction, she said. Not local, which is why Pryor matters, Harwick said. 2 more weeks, maybe 3. It landed 11 days later, not water, not cattle, the feed store. The grain and hay. Dot had spent the last of August's cattle sale on winter reserves that represented the difference between a herd that survived until spring and a herd that didn't. Was in a shared storage building, 2 miles east of the ranch, where 6 families kept supplies. It burned on a November night when the wind was high. By the time anyone saw the smoke, it was too far gone. No one was hurt. The building was empty of people, but the winter feed for 6 families was ash by morning. Dot stood at the edge of the smoking ruin and felt something change inside her. Not breaking, not cracking, changing. The way iron changes in a forge. You don't destroy it. You make it into something with an edge. Harwick stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from him, even through the cold air and the smoke. He didn't say anything, which was right. The fire said everything Pruitt meant to say. Sell, or this. The other families arrived over the course of the morning. The McCaffreys, La Brennans, Ida Petrie, who ran her place alone the way Dot did. Reuben Strand, 22, who'd used his entire inheritance on 40 acres, and was white-faced looking at the ruin. They stood in a loose group in the ash-edged cold, and none of them spoke. Then McCaffrey said, I've got enough stored at the house to last me to February. I can share, Ida Petrie said. We pool it, said. Everyone looked at him. He hadn't spoken loudly, but there was a quality to the words, not commanding. Exactly. More like gravity. The kind of statement that just makes organizational sense when you hear it. Pool what everyone has, he said. Ration by need, not ownership. What one family has becomes what everyone has, and everyone's animals survive together or none of them do. Pruitt wants you scared and separate, because scared and separate is how he picks you off. What's to stop him from burning whatever we pool? Strand said. Nothing, Harwick said. Except that this time, if he burns it, it's not one family's loss, it's everyone's, and everyone will know who did it. Everyone knows now, Dot said quietly. From beside him. Don't they? And the small, hard silence that followed answered the question. They knew. They'd known, in the way people know things they haven't allowed themselves to say out loud. The fire had finally made the silence untenable. "My barn," McCaffrey said. "Big enough to hold what we have between us. I'll bring everything there by nightfall." One by one the others nodded. Reuben Strand last, young and scared and angry and nodding. That was the beginning of the Ruby Valley Collective. Named nothing. Signed with nothing. Just people standing in the ash of something Pruitt had burned, deciding, together, not to fall. They rebuilt the storage building in 4 days. Better than the old one. With 2 exits, better sight lines from the road, and a sleeping area for the overnight watch rotation. That Harwick organized at the McCaffrey kitchen table with a sheet of paper and no fuss. Dot watched him do this. She'd been watching him. More than she meant to. More than was strictly practical. She was aware of this and had decided, with characteristic Dot practicality, that awareness was sufficient response. You didn't have to do anything about a thing, just because you'd noticed it, dummies. He's a good man, she thought. That's all. That's actually quite a lot. Given everything. Given what James was and what losing him did to her. Given what finding someone good again meant about the world possibly being worth. Stop. She stopped. That's all, she thought again. Firmly. He's a good man. Wren appeared at her elbow and looked up at her with those eyes. "Your face is doing something," Wren said. "My face is doing nothing," Dot said. "It was doing something before you made it stop. Go help your father with the watch list." Wren went. But she looked back once, with an expression that was entirely too knowing for an 8-year-old. Harwick found the rope on a Saturday morning. He'd gone up the North Ridge alone, before dawn, while the house was still sleeping. Not because Dot had asked. Because 3 weeks earlier, when she'd told him about James, he'd been looking at that ridge every morning from the fence line, and something about it had been itching at him. The way a detail itches when your brain has clocked it as wrong and keeps coming back to say, "Look again." He looked again, the loose rock section where James had allegedly lost his footing. He went over it inch by inch, in the gray pre-dawn light, with the cold working through his coat, on hands and knees like he was tracking something. He was tracking something. He found it wedged in a crack 15 feet above the base. A length of rope, maybe 8 inches. Rough cut. The cut edge was what stopped him. Not frayed. Not worn. Cut, the kind of cut a knife makes when it cuts fast and clean. He wrapped it in his bandana. Came down the ridge. Came to the kitchen where Dot was at the stove. Put it on the table, she turned. Looked at it. Looked at him. "Where?" she said. 15 feet up. In a crack in the rock face. Positioned right where you'd need to reach, if you were pulling yourself up, to check the upper fence line. Cut. Not worn. Cut. He used a rope to get to the upper section, she said. Her voice sounded very even. From the outside, and someone cut it. Before he went up, Harwick said. From the wear pattern on the cut edge. It was done beforehand. Not while he was on it. He probably tested it at the bottom and it held. Enough. The load of a man pulling himself up the first section would have done the rest. The kitchen was very quiet. Wren was in her room, still sleeping. Dot was glad. Because what happened next in Dot's face was not something a child needed to see. She sat down, put both hands flat on the table. He knew it was coming, she said. In a voice that was very quiet and very precise. In the journal, she said. The last entry he wrote. If anything happens to me before, he stopped himself. He didn't finish. She looked at the rope. He knew Pruitt had people watching. He knew he was getting close to something Pruitt wanted stopped, a pause. And he kept going anyway, she breathed. Once. Twice. He kept going anyway, she said again. Not a question. Not grief. Something else entirely. The sound of a woman deciding something in real time. That rope goes in the tin box, she said. With everything else. Yes, Harwick said. And when Pryor gets back to us. This changes the charge, Harwick said. From fraud and coercion too. I know what it changes it to, Dot said. The word neither of them said sat in the air between them anyway. Murder. She stood up. I'm going to check the cattle. Wren should sleep another hour. Will you? I'll be here when she wakes up, Harwick said. She nodded, picked up her coat, walked to the door, stopped without turning around. He was a good man, James. He was the kind of man who keeps going even when he knows it's dangerous. Because he thought it was right, a beat. I just wanted you to know that about him. She went out. Harwick sat at the table with the rope in its bandana. Outside, through the kitchen window, he watched her cross the yard in the gray morning light. Straight-spined, purposeful, carrying something enormous inside her, the way she carried everything, without letting it show, without slowing down. He thought about Nettie, the way she'd looked at him across the breakfast table the morning before she died, laughing at something he'd said. How ordinary it had been. How unaware he'd been of these specific and irreplaceable weight of ordinary moments. He thought about the year this woman had been carrying. What she was carrying, Aldridge, was right about you, Dorothea, he thought. He just wasn't specific enough. The confirmation about Harkness came from the least likely source, Reuben Strand, 22 years old, new to the valley, with the particular observational gift of someone who hasn't yet learned what he's supposed to not notice. He came to Dot's kitchen on a Wednesday evening, hat in his hands, looking like a man who'd been sitting on something uncomfortable for 2 weeks, and had finally decided the discomfort of carrying it was worse than the discomfort of telling it. He'd been doing repair work at the courthouse in town. Odd jobs, carpentry, handy. Needed the income while the ranch found its feet. 3 weeks ago, fixing a window frame on the second floor. Late, working by lamplight. The office below, Harkness's office, had been occupied. The window above was open and voices carried. The judge and a man I didn't see, Strand said. But the voice, it matched Odom. And the judge called him by his first name. He looked at the table. Like the table might be easier than looking at them. Odom said, the widow's getting help she shouldn't have. Pruitt wants it dealt with before the survey. The room was quiet before the survey, so it was real. Coming sooner than anyone had said publicly. So what do we do, Strand said. If the law here is wrong. Harwick looked at Dot, looked at Harwick, not despair. More like two people who'd both known this was coming, and had been building for it, and were now standing at the exact moment where the thing they'd been building would either hold or it wouldn't. We go over his head, Dot said. We've already started. After Strand left, Harwick said, how long until Pryor? I don't know. The letter went out 6 weeks ago. She looked at the window. Dark outside. Stars just beginning. If Harkness is in Pruitt's pocket, every legal move we make locally goes nowhere. Which means we hold, we document, and we wait. Pruitt's on a timeline, Harwick said. He won't wait forever. No, Dot said. He won't. He told her about Nettie that night. Not because she asked. Because something had shifted. The rope, the journal entry. The way she'd stood in the kitchen and said he kept going anyway. And some threshold had been passed. It was evening. Wren was in bed. They were at the fire. The way they ended up most evenings now. He said, Nettie. Like the name was an opening. She was practical, he said. Like you. The no-nonsense kind of practical that actually means very deep feeling, but controlled. Because the work needed doing. A pause. She knew the case was getting dangerous. We'd decided together it was worth the risk. What I didn't know how direct the risk had gotten. I thought I had more time. I was wrong. You couldn't have known, Dot said. No, but I've spent 4 years convincing myself I should have. What she said was, James knew he was in danger. He kept going. You think he was wrong. Harwick looked at her. He made a choice, she said, an informed one. You gave Nettie the information. She made the choice with you. You didn't take it from her. Something moved in his face, deep and quiet, like a shift in the bedrock. She would have hated me stopping, he said. Eventually, she'd have hated knowing I quit. Then perhaps it's good you're down from the mountains, Dot said. He looked at her. She looked at him, and the fire crackled between them, and the house held them, and outside the Ruby Valley lay under its early winter cold, waiting, as everything was waiting, for what came next. But the silence was different after that. Warmer, less like the absence of words, more like two people deciding, without needing to announce it, that they were in the same room on purpose. It was Wren who found him a Friday. Harwick was at the McCaffrey place. Wren was supposed to be at the kitchen table with her arithmetic. Dot was in the south pasture. Wren went to the privy. On the way back, behind the woodpile, she almost walked directly into a man crouching down with his back to the house, looking at the barn. Not Odom, older, mid-40s, face she'd never seen. She stopped, went completely still. The way her father had taught her, don't freeze with fear, freeze with purpose. Keep breathing. Keep watching. The man was counting something, lips moving, eyes moving systematically across the property. He pulled something from his pocket, a piece of paper, made a mark, then he stood up, stretched, turned, and Wren saw his face. She recognized it, not from life, from memory. Her father's memory. Specifically, the way he sometimes talked in his sleep in the mountains, especially after a bad night, and said names she'd learned not to ask about. She'd heard this one more than once. She walked backward, silently, until she reached the kitchen door, and then she ran to find Dot. Harwick came home to find Dot waiting at the gate. Controlled, but barely. Inside, she said. Now, Wren was at the table with her notebook, completely calm. Waiting, Dot told him what Wren had described. The man at the woodpile, the paper, the counting, and the name Wren had given, the name she'd heard in her father's sleep. Harwick went very still. Cutter. He said, not a question. Cutter, Wren confirmed. Quiet and precise. You said it in your sleep. The mountains. A lot. Harwick sat down. Dot watched something move through his expression, that he was working very hard to keep controlled. This stillness was different from the others. This was grief and fury, and something else she couldn't name, all compressed down to a single point behind his eyes. Cutter, he said again, like testing whether the name still had the same weight. His real name is Edmund Crail. He was Pruitt's coordinator. Before Odom. Before anyone, Crayley was the architect. When the case started falling apart, when pressure came from above, Crayley was why. He's the connection between Pruitt's operation here and the financial interest behind it. He's the man who has reach into the territorial government. He killed Nettie, Dot said. He ordered it, Harwick said. He didn't do it himself. He never does anything himself. His voice was flat, the flatness of enormous pressure applied to enormous feeling. The man I killed, the one who came to our house, was Kroll's instrument, a hired man. I knew there was someone above him. I couldn't prove it. The case was gone, and he stopped. I stopped looking, and now he's in your yard. Dot said. The kitchen was very quiet. Wren was watching her father, not scared. Reading, Dot could see the choice forming. The way a man who knows exactly what he could do and exactly what it would cost looks when he's deciding which side of himself to be. He could go. Right now. Find Crail before Crail left the valley. 9 years of finding men who didn't want to be found. 4 years of mountain survival. Everything he was said. Go. Right now. And this. He sat there for a long time. And Wren got up from her chair, crossed the room, and put her hand on his arm. She didn't say anything. Just put her hand there. And Harwick looked at his daughter's small hand on his forearm, and then he looked at Dot, and then something in his face settled, the way a compass settles after you stop moving it. If I go after Crail now, he said slowly, working it out, I give Pruitt exactly what he needs. A story. The mountain man who came to the widow's ranch and caused violence. Every charge we've been building disappears. Every witness account becomes worthless. Everything in the tin box becomes evidence in a different case, Dot said quietly. Against you. Yes, she held his gaze. And Wren. He looked at his daughter. Wren looked back at him. Those level brown eyes. And Wren. He said. Then Harwick reached up and put his hand over Wren's small one. "We do it right," he said. "We do it so it sticks. We do it so Krayley goes to prison instead of disappearing and waiting and coming back." He looked at Dot. "We do it so he can never reach any of us again." "Yes," Dot said. "Which means we wait for Pryor." "Which means we wait for Pryor." He nodded once. And that was the moment. The one that would matter later, when Dot looked back and tried to identify where things turned. Boone Harwick made a choice in that kitchen. The hardest kind. The kind where the right thing and the thing you want are pointing in opposite directions, and you choose right anyway. Not because it doesn't hurt. Because hurting is not the same as wrong. He chose Wren. He chose Dot. He chose the case. He chose to be what he was building himself back into being, instead of what grief had made of him. Odom came again the next afternoon with a new offer. More generous than before. The kind of number that said, "We want this resolved before whatever is coming becomes more complicated." Dot looked at the number. Handed the paper back. "Tell Mr. Pruitt the answer was no in August. It was no in October. It's no today. And it will be no when he sends someone tomorrow." Odom looked at Harwick, who was standing in his usual position. Not aggressive, just present, just there, in a way that communicated everything. "Mistakes get made," Odom said. "In difficult situations. Sometimes people get hurt who shouldn't be." "Is that a threat?" Harwick said. "That's an observation. About how things go, Mr. Odom." Harwick stepped forward. One step, not close, just enough to change the geometry. His voice was very quiet. "You're a man who does work for people who pay him. I understand that. But you are personally, specifically, going to want to think about the next thing Pruitt asks you to do, because not everyone above you has your interests in mind. And when things conclude, and they will conclude, the people who were directly, personally involved are going to have a different kind of day than the people who weren't." Something shifted in Odom's look. A calculation. The kind a man makes when he starts wondering if the arrangement he's in is going to be as safe as he thought. "I'll pass along your answer," Odom said, and left. "You gave him a way out," Dot said when they were gone. "I gave him something to think about." Odom's not a true believer, he's hired muscle. If he starts calculating his own exposure, he might become useful, or he might just step back far enough to protect himself. Either one helps us. 2 nights later, Harwick was on watch at the storage building. Midnight rotation. Dot brought coffee, walking the 2 miles in the cold because she'd been awake anyway. They sat on the step and drank coffee in the dark and watched the valley. The stars were extraordinary, vast and specific, every constellation crisp as a cut. "James loved the sky out here," Dot said. "He used to drag me out in the middle of winter to look at it. I thought he was insane, but you went. I always went. I pretended to be annoyed I wasn't." Harwick smiled, small, real. Nettie hated the cold. She said she hadn't signed up for Wyoming winters when she agreed to marry a lawman. He looked up at the stars, but she was so proud of the work. Every time we put someone away who'd been hurting people, she'd hear about it and go quiet for a minute and then say, "Good, just good." Like it was the only word the situation deserved. "That's enough," Dot said. "Sometimes good is exactly the right word." "She would have liked you," he said. "Not performing it. Just saying it." Dot looked at him sidelong. "She would have argued with me constantly." "Yes," he said. "Which is why she would have liked you." Dot laughed. Quietly. The kind of laugh that comes when something is funny and also true and also slightly sad, and you've reached the point where you can hold all three at once. Harwick looked at her when she laughed. She felt it. The specific, deliberate way a person looks at something they've decided matters. She didn't say anything about it. But she didn't look away either. The letter came on a Tuesday morning. Through McCaffrey's cousin, a specific trip from Butte, a sealed envelope addressed to nobody. Pryor had received the file. The pattern they'd documented matched 3 other cases in 2 other territories. He was building a federal case. He had a clean judge in Helena. He needed two more things: a witness who would testify about specific acts, and a direct connection between Crail and Ruby Valley. Odom. Said. Odom, Harwick said. Or someone like him. Wren looked up from her spelling. I can watch for Crail, she said. If he comes back, I can get closer than last time. No, Harwick said. Papa Wren. His voice was firm. Not loud, just final. Watching from a distance and writing things down, yes. Getting closer to him? No, I won't have that. Wren looked at him. Her expression moved through several things rapidly. Then, but I can still watch from far. From far. With Dot's knowledge. And you come in the moment anything moves, agreed, Wren said. And went back to her spelling. Dot met Harwick's eyes over his daughter's head. She understood, more than she had any right to, not being a mother. Except that she was. She'd been one for 6 weeks, without anyone naming it, without anything official about it. She was. And it was. And she was going to have to start being honest with herself about that. What came next came fast. The quiet kind. Crayle was still in the valley. Harwick found evidence of it. A horse at the livery, an alias in the boarding house register. He recognized from 7 years ago. The railroad survey was coming sooner than anyone had admitted. Pruitt needed the valley consolidated, which meant the window for action was closing. Wren, from her careful distances, using every skill 4 years in the Bitterroot Mountains had given her, brought them 2 observations that would matter later. Crail met with Harkness at the back of the courthouse. Not the front, the back. In the dark, Odom argued with Crail. I couldn't hear the words, but Odom shook his head 3 times and rode away fast and didn't come back. Something was splitting between them. And in the Aldridge kitchen, on a cold November night, Dot and Harwick sat across from each other and looked at what they had. It was enough. Almost. They needed one witness. One person directly inside Pruitt's operation who would break. Odom, Harwick said. He's scared, Dot said. He's calculating his exposure. I need to talk to him. Alone. Before Pruitt realizes he's wavering. Dot looked at him. That's dangerous, yes. If Pruitt finds out, then we move faster than Pruitt expects. He met her eyes. It's a risk. But we're running out of. He stopped. They both stopped. Because outside at the gate, a horse arrived. Quietly, after dark. A man in a hat she didn't recognize dismounted and tied his horse and simply stood at the gate. Waiting Harwick was at the window beside her. That's Pryor, he said. That's Augustin Pryor. He came himself, and the shape of what they'd been building for 2 months began to take on the particular outline of something that was actually going to happen. Not finished, not yet, but moving. Finally, decisively, moving. Augustin Pryor was not what Dot had expected. She'd imagined someone like Harwick, big, weathered, the kind of man who filled a doorway. What she got was a lean, quiet man of about 50, with a face like a church deacon and eyes like a hawk. He wore a plain coat with no visible badge. He carried a leather satchel that looked like it belonged to a school teacher. He came into the kitchen, looked around with the quick systematic assessment of a man who categorized rooms the same way Harwick did, and set the satchel on the table. Boone, he said. Gus, Harwick said. That was the reunion. 4 years. 2 syllables. Dot liked Pryor immediately. He sat down, accepted coffee, looked at the tin box she'd placed on the table. Tell me what's in there, he said, so they told him. All of it, from the jammed water gate to the poisoned cattle to the burned feed store. The rope from the ridge. James's journal, Wren's notebooks, Reuben Strand's testimony about Harkness, the name Edmund Crail. Pryor listened without interrupting. The kind of listening that isn't just waiting for its turn. When they finished, he opened the satchel. 3 territories, same pattern. 7 ranches consolidated by coercion or worse. 2 deaths ruled accidental that weren't. He looked at Harwick. Edmund Crail is the top of it. If we can place Crail in Ruby Valley and connect him to the specific acts here, we close the case from both ends. We can place him, Harwick said. Wren put him at the woodpile. Wren is 8. Wren is also the most reliable observer in this valley, Dot said. Pryor picked up Wren's notebook, read several entries. His expression didn't change much, except around the eyes, where something that might have been surprised respect appeared briefly, and then went professional again. Still need more than a child's testimony, he said. Odom, Harwick said. He's wavering. I'll talk to him, Harwick said. Pryor looked at him. That's dangerous, yes. I know what I'm doing. Something passed between the two men. The communication of people who've worked dangerous situations together before. All right, Pryor said. But not alone. Wren appeared at 6 the next morning. She looked at Pryor. Pryor looked at her. You're the federal man, Wren said. I am, Pryor said. Are you going to stop Pruitt? That's the plan. Wren looked at him for another moment. Papa says you're the most honest man he knows in the federal service. High bar, Pryor said. Papa doesn't say things he doesn't mean, Wren said, and went to the stove to see about breakfast. Pryor looked at Harwick. She's something, he said quietly. Yes, Harwick said. She is. The approach to Odom was Harwick's plan. Clean and direct, he went alone. Over Pryor's objection. Over Dot's. Over both their objections together, which was formidable. No, he said. Boone Dot started. If Odom is going to turn, it has to be because he decides to. Not because he feels cornered by numbers, he looked at her steadily. I know how to talk to men like Odom. Before was a long time ago, Dot said. Some things don't get old. She looked at him. That look. Simultaneously assessing and arguing, and recognizing she wasn't going to win. If you're not back in 3 hours, she said, I'm coming in after you. I'll be back in 2, Boone. He stopped at the door. Come back, she said. Just that. But the weight in it, he held her gaze. I'll come back, he said. I always come back now. He said it like it was a promise and a decision at once. The saloon was warm and smelled like sawdust and tobacco. Odom was at the far end of the bar, alone, beer untouched. Looking at the wall the way a man looks at a wall when what he's really looking at is something inside himself. Harwick sat down 2 stools away, ordered a beer. They sat for a while. Not together, not apart. Just 2 men at the same bar. You're thinking about the railroad survey, Harwick said. Conversational. Like discussing the weather. Odom said nothing, and calculating your percentage, Harwick said. And coming up short. A pause. Crail is here, Harwick said, quieter now. You know what that means. Pruitt's cleaning up before the survey. Men who know specific things, those are loose ends. And Crail has a history with loose ends. Odom's jaw tightened. There's another way, Harwick said. There always is, Odom said. His voice was rough. First words. Until there isn't, there is this time. Federal marshal with jurisdiction. Clean judge in Helena. If you testify, specific acts, specific dates, specific orders, there's consideration for that. Consideration, Odom said. Like the word had a bad taste. Your freedom, Harwick said. Your life. Which is more than you'll have when Crailo decides you're a liability. Silence, the feed store, Odom said. Finally. That wasn't. I didn't know about that one beforehand. Crayley ordered it direct. He picked up his beer. Set it down without drinking. I've done a lot of things in my life I'm not proud of. But burning out families with children, he stopped. I know, Harwick said. You don't know. No, Harwick said. You're right, I don't. He looked at the man beside him, not with contempt. Something more complicated. But I know what it feels like to be. At a point where you can still choose. Where the door is still open, just barely. He set down his beer. I stood at that door 4 years ago and walked away from it. That was what I needed then. But I stayed away too long. You haven't been at that door as long as I was. Which means it's still open. A pause. You're at the door. Odom was quiet for a long time. Who do I talk to? He said. Come to the Aldridge place, tomorrow before dawn. There's a federal marshal there who'll take your statement. Odom stared at the bar. Then he nodded. Once. Small. Harwick stood up, left money for both beers. Put on his hat, Odom, he said. The man looked up. Whatever else you've done. Coming forward matters. The families in that valley. The Brennans, the Younts, Reuben Strand. Mrs. Aldridge, he held his gaze. It'll matter to them. He was back in 90 minutes. Dot was at the kitchen table. Just sitting, waiting. He came in. Sat down across from her. He's coming, Harwick said. She exhaled. Long and slow. Tomorrow. She looked at him. His face, the lamplight, the mountain solidity of him, the thing she'd been not naming for weeks sitting right there in the space between them. Stop. She stopped. No, wait. Don't stop. You've been stopping for how long now? Long enough. I'm glad you came back, she said. He looked at her steadily. I said I would, I know. A pause. I've heard those words before. From someone who meant them. She looked at her hands. It doesn't always mean the person comes back. Quiet. Dot, he said. She looked up. I'm here. In this kitchen. At this table. He said it like each word was a separate thing he was handing her. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment. Good, she said. Finally. Which was everything she had to say. Which was enough. Odom came before dawn, as he'd said. Pryor took his statement at the kitchen table. Dot made coffee and stayed in the room, because it was her house. Odom talked for 2 hours. Specific, detailed, the feed store, the Watergate, the cattle poisoning, 2 earlier incidents before Harwick arrived. A document Harkness had backdated, and then, carefully, the ridge. Edmund Crail had given the order that put a man on the ridge above the Aldridge property in October of the previous year to cut a rope that James Aldridge used twice a month to check the upper fence line. Dot sat very still through this part. She'd known. She'd known since the bandana on the kitchen table. She'd carried the knowing for weeks and managed it and built it into something that could be used instead of just something that hurt, but hearing it spoken out loud in her kitchen. In the voice of a man who knew the details. That was different. Harwick's hand found hers on the table. Brief. Warm. Not performed. Just there she held on. When Odom was done, Pryor looked up and said, I'll need you to repeat this before a federal judge. I know. Odom said, You understand what you're agreeing to. I understand all of it, Odom said. Quiet. Tired. The voice of a man who'd been carrying a weight a long time and was setting it down at a cost. I understand all of it. All right, Pryor said. Then we move today. They rode out at 8 in the morning. Cold. Still. The valley under its November sky, pale and wide. The mountains at the edges of everything. Pryor had his federal authority and 2 deputies who'd arrived at 7. Young men with clean badges and the slightly overwhelmed look of people who'd been briefed on the way in. Harwick rode beside Pryor. Dot rode behind. As agreed. She was not fine, she was managing, which was different. Her hands on the reins were steady. Her face was steady. Inside was a different story. Inside was the accumulation of a year and the rope in the bandana, and James's unfinished sentence and the weight of everything she'd been carrying forward, because there was no other direction to carry it. He kept going anyway. She kept going. Wren raised her hand when everyone discussed the plan at the kitchen table. I want to go too, she said. No, said everyone in the room simultaneously. Wren lowered her hand. Looked at her notebook. I'll stay with Mr. Odom, she said, and write down everything he tells me about the operation, so we don't miss anything. Odom looked at the small girl with those level brown eyes. Fine, he said. Like a man who'd given up arguing with weather. Crail was at the boarding house, Harwick knew before they dismounted. Something in the way the curtain had moved when they turned onto the street. He told Pryor with a look. Pryor nodded. They went in through the front, 2nd floor. 3rd door, Pryor knocked. Nothing. Harwick looked at the gap at the bottom of the door, at the shadow of feet that wasn't there. He went out the window, he said. They moved fast, down the stairs, out the back. The deputy at the rear pointed east, a man, running toward the livery. Harwick ran. Not because he was fastest. Because he knew what Crail looked like and what Crail would do and which direction a man who'd been doing this work for 20 years would run when cornered, not east. East was the distraction. He cut north. Down the alley behind the feed merchant. Over the fence at the back of the Methodist church. through the bare-stripped kitchen garden, and there, Crail was at the fence line where the town met the open ground. Moving fast but not panicked, controlled, experienced, the unhurried urgency of a professional. He heard Harwick behind him, and turned. They looked at each other. Across 20 feet of frozen ground, a man who had ordered a woman killed and watched a lawman go silent for 4 years. And the lawman who'd gone silent. Only he wasn't silent anymore, Crail. Harwick said. Crail's hand moved toward his coat. Don't. Harwick said the word was very quiet. But there was something in it. 4 years of mountains and silence and his daughter's hand on his arm and everything he'd chosen in the kitchen when he could have chosen differently. And Crail heard it. His hand stopped. There's a federal marshal 50 yards behind me, Harwick said, with a warrant and a case that goes back through 3 territories. And there's a witness who gave his statement this morning with every specific detail you'd prefer he didn't have. Another step. It's over, Crail. Not the messy way. The right way. Something moved in Crail's face. The recognition of a man whose calculation has run out of road. You quit, Crail said. You quit and went to the mountains. What are you doing? Coming back, Harwick said. Simply, he was close enough now. Crail tried anyway, the desperate lunge of a man who has nothing left to lose. Harwick had expected it, had been positioned for it since 15 feet out. He stepped aside. One clean movement. Put his arm across Crail's path. Took him down to the frozen ground without theater. Hard. Final. Crail hit the ground and stayed down. Pryor arrived at a run. His deputies 2 seconds behind. Harwick stepped back, breathing hard. Looked at Crail on the ground. He thought about everything he could have done instead. In the past, in the kitchen, when he'd chosen to stay, he'd chosen this. All of it led here, to this frozen corner of Ruby Valley in November 1878, to a man on the ground, to justice being done the right way. Good, Nettie would have said, just that. Good, he stepped back. Let Pryor and his deputies do their work. Pruitt was arrested at his ranch house at 9:47 in the morning. Dot watched from 100 yards away, on horseback, as the deputies rode up the long approach. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the door open, saw Pruitt come out, well-dressed as always, composed. He looked at the deputies, the badges, the warrant, and then, as if he sensed it, he looked down the approach road and saw Dot. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't do anything that could be called a gesture. She just looked at him, steady, from 100 yards away. The woman whose husband he'd had killed, whose cattle he'd poisoned, whose feed he'd burned, who'd spent a year doing the one thing he'd been counting on her not being able to do. Hold on, find help, build a case, wait, and whatever he saw in her face, all of it, the grief and the anger, and the months of labor, and the refusal to stop. It was apparently more than his composure could manage because his face changed. Just for a second, just enough. She took it, folded it up, kept it. For James. She thought, that's for James. Then she turned her horse and rode back toward town. Harkness was the simplest of the 3. He sat back down in his chair when the deputy arrived, put his hands on the desk, and said, I'd like to speak to a lawyer, which was, under the circumstances, probably the first honest thing he'd said in 3 years. Dot found Harwick in town, outside the livery with his horse. The look of a man who'd just done something he'd needed to do for a long time and hadn't yet caught up to how he felt about it. She stood beside him. Crail, she said. In custody, he nodded, looked at the mountains. The same mountains she'd looked at a year ago the morning they'd told her about James. Different now. Or she was different. Both, probably. Did it feel how you thought it would? She asked. I thought I'd feel resolved. That it would close something. Does it? No. It's not the kind of thing that closes. But it's right. And that's its own thing. Separate from how I feel, she understood that. The way justice and grief were not the same thing, and didn't substitute for each other, and both mattered, and neither one fixed the other. Not satisfied, she said. But glad. Yes. Harwick said, Nettie too, she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression, unguarded, open, the way faces go when someone says the right thing in the right voice. Nettie too, he said quietly. Come home. Dot said home. She'd said it without thinking. She felt her own face do something. She started. I know what you mean, he said. He didn't help her out of it. Which was probably fair. Home, she said again, deliberately this time, looking at him. Come home. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he untied his horse from the post. Let's go get Wren, he said. When they got back to the Aldridge ranch, Wren was sitting on the front porch with her notebook and Rosie beside her. Odom's horse was gone, a note said. I'll be at the courthouse when needed. F. Odom. Wren looked up when they rode in. Read their faces. It worked, she said. It worked, said. Wren nodded. Opened her notebook to a page near the back. Mr. Odom was talking while I was writing, she said. He said things out loud that he wasn't putting in his statement. I wrote those down too. She held the notebook out to Pryor. He mentioned a name. Someone above Crail. I didn't know if it mattered, so I wrote it down anyway. Pryor took the notebook. Read. Something surprised moved through his controlled expression. It closes a gap, Pryor said. A specific gap in the connection between Crail's operation and the political protection that buried your case the first time. Wren nodded. Like this was what she'd expected. You're welcome, she said. Went inside to take her coat off. Pryor looked at Harwick. She's 8, Harwick said, not explaining. Just confirming. She's remarkable, Pryor said. I know, Harwick said. And the way he said it, the simple, full weight of a father who sees his child clearly, was everything. The days that followed were strange. Not bad strange. Not even uncertain strange. More like the particular quiet of something resolved. Not finished, just no longer pressing forward. Pryor stayed 3 days. He and Harwick worked through the documentation with the focused intensity of men finishing something they'd started years ago. Dot sat in on most of it. Not because she was needed for the legal work, but because it was her case too. Her husband's case. She'd earned her seat at that table. Pruitt, Crail, and Harkness were transported to Helena under federal escort. The trial would take months. The case was solid. Pryor said so, in the flat assured tone of a man who didn't say things he didn't mean. The railroad survey came through Ruby Valley 2 weeks later. The land values shifted exactly as Harwick had predicted, except that the valley's landowners were still on their land. The Brennans, the McCaffreys, Ida Petrie, Reuben Strand. 22 years old, with his 40 acres intact and his future intact with it. They held a gathering at the McCaffrey barn. Not a celebration exactly, more a collective exhale. Food on tables everyone had contributed to. Children running. The particular noise of a community that had been holding itself tight for months and was learning to let the grip go. Dot stood at the edge of it and watched. Harwick appeared at her elbow. He'd been talking to McCaffrey about the spring calving season. He had the look of a man who'd absorbed himself into this valley so naturally that it was already hard to remember when he hadn't been in it. You look like you're thinking again, he said. I always look like that. You look like you're thinking harder than usual. She looked at the gathering, at Wren, who was in the corner with 2 of the Brennan girls, apparently explaining something with diagrams drawn on the back of a feed bill. Teaching, Dot thought. She's already teaching. I had a conversation with James once, she said. Early on. First winter here. He said the thing he wanted most was for this place to be somewhere people came toward. Not just us, other people. People who needed somewhere. She turned to look at Harwick. He said he thought the best things in a person's life were usually the things they hadn't planned. Harwick looked at her steadily. Was he right? He said. She looked at him. At this man who'd come down from his mountain with a daughter and a worn coat and nothing much to offer, except everything that mattered. Who'd fixed her water trough on day 2 without being asked. Who'd gone back into the difficult places because leaving wasn't who he was. Who'd made the harder choice when the easier choice was right there? He was right about most things, she said. Infuriatingly often. Harwick almost smiled. Almost as often as you. Don't push it, she said. He smiled. Full and real. The kind that had taken 6 weeks to arrive, and was worth every week of waiting. Pryor came to find Harwick the morning he left. Not in the kitchen. Outside at the fence line, Dot watched from the window. The two men talking. Pryor reaching into his coat. Something exchanged. She heard boots on the porch. Harwick came in and set something on the table. A badge, Federal Deputy Marshal. New issue, she looked at it. Then at him. Pryor's offering, she said. He's offering, Harwick said. What did you say? I told him I'd talk to you first. She looked at him, this surprised that he'd said it. But the simple, natural way he'd said it. Like it was obvious. Like of course she came into it. Do you want it? She said. He looked at the badge. Part of me does. The case is going to need follow-through. Pryor's building something that could change how the territorial government handles land fraud for years. There's more to do, she said. But Wren needs to be somewhere. Not moving. Not a mountain. He met her eyes. And I told Nettie I'd build something that lasted. I never got the chance. I've been living with that for 4 years. A pause. I'm looking at the chance now, right here, in this valley. At this table, could you do both? She said. He blinked. The casework. Working with Pryor. Not as a traveling deputy, not gone for months. But as someone with the legal standing to build cases properly. From here. With the knowledge and the contacts you have. She looked at the badge. Pryor could use someone who knows this territory. Who has what you have. Who's here? Harwick looked at her. I'm not asking you to give it up, she said. I'm asking you if there's a version of both. A pause. Because the man I'm. She stopped. Breathed. The man who matters to me should be exactly who he is. Not something smaller. The kitchen was very quiet. Dot, he said. She looked at him. I love you, he said. Like stating a fact he'd been sure of for a while, and had finally decided there was no reason not to say. She held very still for a moment. Oh, well. There it is then. I love you too, she said. Like handing him something solid. Something she'd made. Something with weight. In case that wasn't, in case you weren't sure. He looked at her. The way a man looks when he's been afraid of wanting something for a long time. And found it anyway. I was hopeful, he said. Good, she said. Hoping is allowed. He reached across the table, took her hand. Both hands. Work-worn. Matched, she looked at them. Their hands. James, she thought. And then James would have been glad. She believed it. Completely. Talk to Pryor, she said. Tell him what you'd need to make it work from here. Without disappearing, she squeezed his hands. See what he says, and if it works, Harwick said carefully. Then we figure out the next thing, she said. Together, he nodded. The nod of a man who has found the ground under his feet and intends to stand on it. Wren's reaction to the news that they were staying, that this was not a winter arrangement, but the actual shape of the future, was characteristically Wren. She looked at her father, looked at Dot, performed her rapid internal calculation. I knew, she said, Ed. You knew what? Harwick said, that we were staying. I knew in the second week. When Dot showed you the journal, she looked at Dot. You didn't show him that because you needed help. You showed him because you'd decided he was worth trusting. Completely, she shrugged. That's not something you do with someone who's temporary. Dot and Harwick looked at each other. She's 8, he said. She's going to be terrifying at 20, Dot said. Wren picked up her notebook. I'm going to check on the cattle, she said, and went out. He proposed on a Sunday morning in early December. Not planned. Not prepared. They were at the north fence line. Harwick repairing a post that had heaved in the freeze. Dot beside him because she'd come to check on it, and then just stayed. The mountains were white. The valley spread out below them. Cattle visible. In the distance, he stopped working. She looked at him. He looked at the fence. At the spot where he'd found the rope in the bandana. At the ridge above where James had died, trying to do the right thing. I want to ask you something, he said. Here. At this spot. Not because it's easy, because it's the hardest place. And I want to start from the hardest place and build. She waited, marry me, simple. Just that, not because it's practical. Not because we're already something that looks like a family. But because I want to stand in front of whatever comes next with you. Specifically you. Because every day I've been on this land, I've seen what you are and who you are, and He stopped. I don't want to go back to not knowing you. She looked at him. The mountain man who'd come down from the Bitterroot Range with a worn coat and an 8-year-old and nothing much, except everything that turned out to matter. Who'd fixed her water trough on day 2. Who'd gone back into the difficult places, because leaving wasn't who he was, who was standing at her fence line asking her to choose him back. We have to ask Wren, she said. He blinked, then, yes, obviously. She gets a vote, she always gets a vote. Then yes, said. We ask Wren, and when she says yes, which she will, because she's been waiting for us to get to the obvious conclusion for weeks. She has, Harwick agreed. Then yes, said. I'll marry you, Boone Harwick, he let out a breath. Like he'd been holding it without realizing. She reached out and straightened the collar of his coat. The gesture she'd made before that first time, small and practical and intimate. Only now it meant something that had been named. Come on, she said. Let's go find your daughter. Wren was in the kitchen, at the table, notebook open, doing arithmetic she'd set for herself. She looked up when they came in. That rapid assessment. Those brown eyes running the calculation. Finally, she said, We'd like your opinion, Harwick said. My opinion is yes. Wren said, and went back to her arithmetic. Laughed. The full kind. The unguarded kind. Wren, Harwick said. She looked up. Are you happy? She put down her pencil. Considered the question with the seriousness she gave everything. Yes, she said. I think this is what happy feels like. She looked at Rosie, sitting in the corner of the table. I told Rosie about you when we first came. I told her Papa had found somewhere we might be able to stop. She looked at Dot. I told her the woman at the door had good eyes, the kind that saw things and didn't look away. Dot held very still. Mama would have liked you, Wren said. Not sad, just true. I know because the things you teach me are the things she would have wanted me to know. You didn't plan that. You just did it because it's who you are. She picked up her pencil. That's the best kind of person. The kitchen was quiet. The fire made its small sounds. Outside, the Ruby Valley lay under its December cold. The repaired fences running straight and solid. The creek that Pruitt had tried to own moving freely the way it always had. They were married in the spring. May. The valley full of the particular green that only exists for a few weeks before summer burns it back to gold. Tana, under the big cottonwood by the creek where James had planted it the second year, because he'd said it would give shade eventually. He'd been all right about that. Wren was the only attendant. She wore a blue dress that Dot had sewn, with ribbon in her braids, and she carried wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning, each one chosen with deliberate attention, as if every flower was a decision she'd made carefully. Before the ceremony, she went alone to the cottonwood tree. Dot watched from a distance, did not follow. Wren stood at the tree for a while. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out Rosie, worn and well-loved and irreplaceable. She didn't throw it, didn't bury it. She placed it in the crook of the lowest branch, with both hands, gently, the way you place something precious in a safe place. She stood back, looked at the doll in the tree. Said something Dot couldn't hear from where she was. Then she walked back across the grass, her blue dress catching the morning light. Her face the particular face she had when she'd finished doing something important and was satisfied with how it had gone. She took Dot's hand. She's staying with Mr. James, she said. So neither of them is alone. Dot pressed her lips together. Hard. Breathed. That's perfect, she said. When she could, I thought so, Wren said, and led her mother toward the cottonwood tree, toward Boone Harwick, who was standing in the morning light, with the expression of a man who had come down from a mountain, and found exactly what the mountains couldn't give him, and toward the rest of a life that neither of them had planned, which was, exactly as James had said, the best kind.